As you guys know, as you all know, that we are introducing a new product to the DataFlex market called DocuMentor. And what we see in the DataFlex market, there are some challenges to the DataFlex developers, and DocuMentor is designed to address those challenges. And more importantly, for today's topic, what I'd like to demonstrate is how DocuMentor can fit into your software development process. So one of the challenges that face DataFlex developers today is, number one, is talent shortage. DataFlex has been around for a long time, and DataFlex developers, some of them are getting older, retiring. New people are not coming into the DataFlex market. New graduates want to learn more about Java or .NET or more mainstream technologies. So what we have is an aging developer base, and not many new people coming into the market. The other challenge that we have seen companies using DataFlex face is that they lose key programmers, and because of the talent shortage that I mentioned above, they're not able to replace them quickly. So there is a high cost for them in training these new developers once these key programmers leave or retire. And the high training cost translates, it comes from many ways. Even if you're a DataFlex, if you do not know DataFlex, first they have to learn all the standards of DataFlex and how DataFlex is programmed. And DataFlex, as you know, is different from other languages. So they have a learning curve there. And once they learn, it takes them a long time to understand that, and the system that they're going to maintain does not have any documentation. There's a lot of legacy code out there. So what ends up happening is that a new programmer, even if you bring him on into the company, they are not able to be productive in a short period of time. And one of the problems, one of the challenges, the way we address these challenges is primarily rooted in taking on a more development mindset. The DataFlex developers, typically, unless you're a large company, are anywhere from one person shop to 5 people, 5 developer, 10 developer, in that range. And a lot of time they take a process which is code and fix. Basically, they have a business requirement or they understand the business well and they start coding, and DataFlex makes it very easy for us to write complex apps quickly. So nobody has time to follow a software development process. And the legacy apps were developed in that way. They were single individual users who are developers who started writing the code, and then as the application grew, they added more people, but then you're reacting to the market. You don't have time to write documentation and make it easy for new developers to come on board. So what we are proposing is that, the DataFlex developers have to start looking at more of a team development mindset. Even if they are individuals, they have to look at it as if that our code has to be maintained by somebody else down the road, and that we need to implement some software development process so it makes it easy for us to replace people when they come on, and to train them. And the DocuMentor philosophy is based around these two things. How do we address the challenges facing DataFlex? What is software development process? You all know, to some form, it's not, when we talk about software development process, we mean a structured approach to software development. And there is a series of steps that you follow, and there are a bunch of programming models out there that allow for some of these software development processes to be followed. Typically, a software development, there are 5 phases of software development process. And in a logical way, they follow and fit into each other in a logical way. So the first step is business requirement that the business unit generates. Well, we need to implement, say, a CRM system, and the CRM system should have such and such requirements. And typically in larger team, a business analyst or somebody who's familiar with the business takes these requirements from the users and then goes to, say, somebody like an architect, a software architect who's going to look at the requirements, who has an overview of the entire system, and then is going to implement some high-level architecture documentation then pass it on to some developer who's going to implement the system. Then the testers will test it. And once the system is rolled out, there is a maintenance and ongoing feature change that goes back into requirement, and it's kind of a cyclical process. And these are the different typical phases of software development. Now, in order to achieve any of these different phases, for example, the implementation phase, which is more relevant to the DataFlex developers, you have a bunch of different models. And you guys can look it up, what those models are. What we have found is that about 7 to 8 out of 10 DataFlex developers, I mean 70 to 80% DataFlex developers, take the first approach, which is code and fix. What they do is that they get a business requirement, they start coding, and they start fixing the problems, and they are always reacting to the customer's needs or the business needs. And in that process, because DataFlex is easy to follow and easy to write, documentation or any kind of architecture or software documentation is not maintained. In a larger team, you have a waterfall approach, and you can look it up also what the details are. Basically, each phase is completely designed. It's completed before you can start on the next phase. So somebody designs the product, somebody codes it, somebody tests it. So it's kind of a waterfall going gradually down. But that requires larger teams, and sometimes this is not very effective. One of the spiral method is again an approach where you are emphasis on more managing the risk in software development. But the most popular one that's finding a lot more mainstream attention, processes. So in an agile development, what you're doing is that you start with a small incremental code, and then you roll it out, you test it, implement it, and if it works, then it goes out again, and you add the features around that. And then what you do is that you let the process evolve more by reaction, but at the same time, you're controlling the communication between the teams at every stage. And it's more of a feedback driven. You roll out a small product, a small feature set, then you say, okay, this is working fine, then you go out and increase the feature set in kind of more of an iterative model. And one of the things in agile development is that you have to document, but you don't document frequently, but you document later in the stage. So you're not completely outdated because you're making rapid changes to your source code. Your documentation is going to be out of sync with your code. So the important thing here is that what they emphasize on is that you should document, but document later in the phase when you reach a certain milestone and you roll it out. Then maybe you can document so that you don't your documentation does not become obsolete. So the key to success is to any of these software development process is basically communication between individuals if they're working as a team and accurate documentation. The documentation, as I explained, why it's important. The communication between the team is obvious that if you're two people sitting in a room, it's easy to communicate. However, when you have worked together for a few years and then you bring in a third individual, that third individual has no idea what the history has been behind that software and how it was developed, why were certain design choices made. And once the way to communicate with more than one or two individuals is essentially to have a record, which is a documentation of what the system does. So when the third person comes in, they can look at the implementation details and can catch up and be more productive quickly. As far as communication goes in the software development process, my experience has been that sometimes you're working with a lot of smart people. However, the terminologies are not accurate, meaning you're saying something and the other person takes that terminology as something completely different, and the communication is disrupted. And this is more true when you're working with remote teams. And as in today's world, you have teams who are working in different continents, different time zones. In our case, also we have teams in 3 different continents, I think 6 different time zones. And for us, from our experience, it's been very important that we need to agree on certain terminologies. We use in doing this is we use SharePoint or you can use any other like Google Sites or some other repository where you can store certain documentation and teams can easily look it up, by features, and know what you're talking about. So the documentation part is there are different kinds of documentation that goes into a software development phase. Depending on which phase you're in, if you are working in the business requirement phase, there's a requirements documentation. Why are we developing this software? Why are we developing this particular feature and what is the business need for that? That comes from the business requirement side. And the documentation, one of the things with documentation is that it should be easy to maintain and should be accurate so that when the teams are working together and their communication lines are established, they're looking at the same documentation and are able to follow that. The documentation has to be readable and has to be understandable. It has to be current, meaning that if the code change has taken place, the documentation should reflect that. And then, like as I mentioned before, that the terminologies used throughout the documentation should be consistent. So what we are going to focus on, because our interest is in DocuMentor and primarily focusing on where documentation fits into the software development process, we're going to talk about what are the different types of documentation that go into a software development process. As you recall, the first part, we said that you go from requirements to designing, to implementation, to testing, to maintenance, and then so on. And each stage can have a documentation phase. The requirements doc typically comes from a business side, and it's typically not the job of a programmer unless you're an individual working in a company that needs to take care of that. But it's something that sometimes is very obvious. Sometimes you do not have to create a requirements doc because the feature request is very simple and easy to do. Then the other part is the architecture documentation as to how all these different blocks in your application, how does the entire application work? It doesn't talk about design choices. It does not go into the implementation details, but it just shows what is the intended, how the application should and is currently working. And the third documentation type is the technical documentation, the technical design documentation, which is more program driven. And this is what most of you have to deal with, is that what changes are you making to the code? Because they understand the code, are also responsible for maintaining the code. So this is kind of the area we are going to be focusing on mostly with respect to DocuMentor. The final documentation is user documentation, is something used by your users, how they're going to use the application, how certain features work, etc. So the technical design document is what we are interested in, and what basically it contains, it involves is the code level documentation, why certain things work the way they work, how they are related to each other. Talks about details of implementation and does the design choices you made. The problem with any kind of documentation like that is that programmers typically do not like to write documentation. They like to code. And, as soon as they get a problem, they start thinking about the problem and they start working on the code. And the documentation kind of falls to the wayside. The other thing is that a lot of time comments are not properly put into the code, and if you do not have a software development process, you do not capture why you made those design choices. And I think that's an important part. Now, some of you might put comments regularly in your code, but we have seen a lot of code, legacy code. We come across DataFlex 2.3 style code, which goes on and on with 25 different go-tos in a code in one routine. And you completely do not follow what's going on. And so it makes it very hard for anybody to maintain that kind of code. The other part with the documentation is that even if the programmer is disciplined, it's time consuming. And unless you have another resource working with the programmer all the time documenting, which becomes more costly, it still requires a lot of time. And the other part is that if you're following something like an agile development process, your documentation gets outdated very quickly, meaning your documentation does not reflect the changes you've made to the code. And these are some of the challenges which are from the documentation side that everybody faces. Now, in the non-DataFlex market, there are tools available that will allow you to generate documentation from comments in your code. But again, that still requires programmer to write the comments. So if you know about tools like Doxygen or NDoc or JavaDoc, they can create interface documents directly from your code, meaning class definitions. But you have to be responsible for making comments in the code and putting the tags properly in the source. Now, from a documentation challenge point of view, agile developers use this term called craft. Basically, what it means is that the document should be current, which I mentioned before. It should be readable, meaning it should be something that can be easily followed and understood by anybody. And it's understandable because terminologies can be different. Some person may write, may use the term tables. You might use file. And depending on how you understand each other, that terminology differences can lead to issues. The other important part is that documentation has to be followed by programmers, meaning they believe that this document is accurate and is something that they can trust blindly. And also the cost of developing this documentation should be cheaper, meaning it's not something that requires a programmer to code 50% of his time in a week on coding and 50% of time maintaining the documentation. Then it becomes unwieldy. And that's why the automated document generation tools are popular, because it takes a lot of the effort out of the programmers, from the programmers. So one of the things what are the keys to, what are the goals of technical documentation? So the goal of technical documentation is primarily captured design choices. You should be able to create an audit trail of changes that were made. So why you made this change and why this change was undone. And if you have a complex project, a lot of times you may have seen that some programmers made a change and put a comment in there, and then some side effects happen. A bug comes up 6 months later, and then you go in and then have to undo that change because you said, well, this change broke our product. So that kind of audit trail is very important for maintaining the integrity of the product. And we are very guilty of this too. In our early days, a long time ago, going back to 97, 98, 2000, when we were developing our database driver products. It's a very complex product. It's written in C. And a lot of times we were making rapid changes because some of the behaviors were changing in DataFlex. The SQL databases were changing also. And we didn't follow a streamlined process. We were, 2-3 people company. And we ran into these a lot. And it became a hurdle that after a certain point, we were spending a lot more time trying to fix bugs than developing new features. And only after we got our software development process under control, that we felt that our productivity increased more, that our product maintenance went down. And also it's been easier for us to bring on new developers and train them on our product. And if you, like the database driver, can get very hairy and complex to support, and I'm sure that's the same way with some of the names that I see here have very complex application. If you have an application, I think one application I've seen with Philip, which is a company, Softnair in Belgium, they do very complex screens where you're putting together all the parts that go into making a furniture. And I can just imagine the complexity in that kind of software. And if you're not keeping track of how those calculations are done and why changes were made, you can get lost very easily. So I think that the documentation part is very important. However, it should not be too complex for you to maintain. There are few keys to software implementing a simple development process. One is documentation, obviously, that you need to know what you're dealing with, or is the software version control. I think that until like 5-6 years ago, a lot of DataFlex developers were not using version control systems. I think now it's very common, but that was not something that they pursued. Bug tracking system is like you document and record all your bugs that come in. For example, in our case, every bug report that comes from our testing or that comes from our customers always go into a bug tracking system. We use a product called OnTime, which is available commercially, and every bug has assigned an incident ID. And that bug tracking system is the same that the developers use, and we follow a workflow where the bug is assigned to an individual depending on which product the bug is reported in. And this number, the incident number, also gets put in the comments of the source code. So even though in the comments you might not put a lot more detail at the code level, you will just reference that code number, what that incident was about. And then you can go back and look at the more detail and any kind of interaction with the customer, including down to the test results. And then from bug tracking, once the issue has been fixed, we have the test results that go into some kind of a regression testing, which is a separate area. And one of the other simple things that you can do right now is a shared workspace. In our case, we use SharePoint Services, which is free with Microsoft Windows 2003 onwards. You can build a small site. There are a bunch of templates available. So every product that we write or every feature that we implement or every major project we take, we have a versioning, we have a number, whether it's a development spec, it's a requirement spec, whatever it is, and it's available. So any new developer that comes in can easily follow what that is doing. Now, of course, from our point of view, from a DocuMentor point of view, DocuMentor fits into this software development process in the documentation area, where we want to make it easy for documentation to be available, the technical design documentation. We want it made easy for developers to generate this documentation and be able to capture the changes they're making very quickly. Now, the two key documentation, as I mentioned, are the architecture documentation and the technical design documentation. And what we're going to do is that I think that DocuMentor fits into both these categories to some extent. Because the way we design DocuMentor is that, first of all, we don't think that there is any tool in the market. We have looked around that gets this kind of information and presents it in the format that you're able to see. So what DocuMentor does, it generates application design documentation directly from your DataFlex source. So unlike other tools in the market that rely a lot on programmers putting comments into their source code, we know that we are dealing with a lot of legacy applications. There are a lot of character mode applications out there, a lot of DataFlex applications out there. And for them, it's not possible to go in and put comments into all the code. And in some cases, somebody else wrote the code 20, 30 years ago. So what we felt that it was important that we generate the code directly from the source code. Now, it is a lot more work on our part to be able to parse out all the information, but we know for a fact that that information is going to be accurate. And the other part is that DocuMentor, because it generates the source code directly from the documentation directly from the source code, it is able to get the most accurate design changes into the doc. During the testing of DocuMentor, for example, we were looking at some visual DataFlex examples. And what we found is that because DataFlex, as you guys know, is so a lot of classes and information, in the documentation. But when we generated the source, the DocuMentor report, and we looked at the interfaces, we found that, and we tried to look into the documentation, we found some things were not captured in the documentation because the documentation was written, maybe when Visual DataFlex 12 came out, or 15 came out, or 14 came out, and we were testing with Visual DataFlex 16. So sometimes you could see that in some obscure areas where somebody didn't have a chance to go and look at the documentation, we found that the documentation was out of date. And that's where ongoing design, generation of the code documentation is important. And generating from the code ensures that whatever you're deploying into the market is what you're going to get in the documentation. One of the things that we have implemented new, which is from the first release, is that we actually capture now the source code, and I'm going to show you a demo. the source code of what you're looking at and put that into the application. So this is a new feature, I think was some of the requests from some of the developers that it would be nice if we can click on an item and look at the actual source code without having to go into the studio. The other part is that we wanted to make sure that, and this is more from my personal experience, that documentation, when it's linear, meaning one after the other in a Microsoft Word documentation, it's very hard for you to go and remember everything and jump back and forth after a few pages. And it's very hard when documentation gets very long to keep a sequential documentation and follow it clearly. So we felt that we had to take more of a matrix approach and go and see the documentation without having to go linearly, because linearly you will forget about it. But if you want to follow something, say, okay, I want to look at this class and see where these classes are being used, what are the parent classes, and I can go to the line number of the module, look at the module, look at the screenshot, you can have a very clear understanding of your application architecture without having to go through and read tons and tons of Word document. So one of the things is with DocuMentor is that DocuMentor is unique. It's unique in the sense that there are not many tools available out there that can generate documentation from the source. You might be able to find Java Doc, or I think .NET might have something, or Doxygen or NDoc, where they generate the class definitions only. But in order to have anything more, you have to write comments for that. But what we did was that we know DataFlex well, so we created this whole parser which goes through the DataFlex source code, looks at every element, and creates a relationship between them. So for example, if you're looking at a particular field in a table, we can tell you where that field is being used and how many times. And that is unique. It takes a lot more work, takes a lot more processing power. I don't think that 5 years ago we would have been able to do a DocuMentor on an average desktop. Even now it takes longer time. But because this process is meant to run once in a while, once every month, typically on a server, it's acceptable that we can go into this level of detail. The other part is that we know the relationship between objects, meaning if we are going to use a particular class, we know how that class is actually used, and then we know how it ties into other parts of your code. We also track occurrences of objects. What I mean is that how many times a particular field or a table is or file is used in the system, we can tell you, and you can go and look at it. So, for example, if you have a scenario where a business requirement requires you to change a particular field, say the name of the field even. Well, you have to go through your code to figure out where the field is being used and how many, and then go in and individually fix that. Well, in DocuMentor, it's available to you in just one click, and we'll show you that. And the other unique feature that we feel is really cool about DocuMentor is that tools will not give you a rendition of your GUI elements in your program. So you write your code in DataFlex, you have a view or whatever you have defined, you have their lengths defined, you have the a nice little dialogue going, but you cannot see it until you actually run the application. Well, DocuMentor actually processes that and renders it, so you can actually look at it and see almost an exact replication of your screen in the report. I'm going to switch to a sample report and show you what these things looks like. All right, so. All right. So this is a sample DocuMentor report, and one of the things that we were talking about is that, what does DocuMentor capture? So DocuMentor is capturing all your application views, reports, lists, whatever you have. They are all available to you in one module, one place. So this basically tells you what are your different modules. Then for every module, it gives you an outline on the right side of what that view looks like. So we don't have to put a lot of detail into this, but the thing that was missing here and what a lot of developers wanted from us was that ability to view the source code. And that's what we have added here. So for example, if you're looking at this customer view right now, you can click on the customer view and the entire source code is now available to you. Now, it is not just the source code that's going to be there now. One of the things that we have done is that you can actually jump to a particular line number. In this case, for example, I want to see the customer address field is used in O customer address and line number is 54. I can jump to that line number and I'm right there at line number 54. Now, sure, you can do some of these things in the studio. I don't think you can go and look from the database and figure out where it is, but I think of course you can have 54 tabs open in your studio, but it can get very messy, and it's not as easy to do. So if you are a new person coming into a company and you want to look at all of these details, it's at your fingertips, literally. If you are a programmer who has been working with your code for a long time and you have a large application, it also is very productive for you because you are able to take a look at the code. And again, this thing is available to you in many different, it's browser based, so you can run it on any platform. And we have added support for iPad, where we had to build the UI to look a lot more like the iPad application. But the idea is that you're able to view your code and see things without having to pull up the studio and take a look at stuff. So one of the things where I was talking about is the GUI element. Well, I can jump to the GUI element and see that what my code, the customer view, looks like when it's going to run. And like, for example, if you have multiple tabs, we will show the multiple tabs here. And you can jump to the source code and take a look at the source code itself and see what's going on at the source code. The other thing that we do is that we are not only profiling your application, but we are also profiling the DataFlex libraries that are used in your system. So you can always jump from application to library at any given time and look at your application. The other element that we profile are the classes. If you have an object-oriented program, then all your classes, the user-defined classes, are available. And we present it in a visual hierarchy where you can go from the base class that you're using all the way down to the user-defined class. So if I say, well, customer data dictionary, now I'm a new guy coming into the company, I don't know anything about your application, I don't have to learn the intricacies of DataFlex too much. I need to focus on how your application works. And say, well, customer data dictionary is used in so many different places. So I can look at, there are 19 references of customer data dictionary. And I can go to each one of them by just clicking on that line number, and I can go and take a look at the source code and see what it looks like. If I want to go and look at the data dictionary class itself, I can click on it and jump to the data dictionary class. This is coming from the DataFlex packages. I can also know what are the direct known classes of this particular class. I can also have mix-ins all defined, and I can jump to any one of them from there. And what we do also is that going back into the capturing the code level details, if you put a consistent coding mechanism, what we do is that we provide the code and highlight that so you can see clearly what that comment means. So it's not it catches all the code, and you can have a programming a header at the start of a function or a class document. You can capture information at the code level, whatever it is. You can clearly see the interface and the comment. So you can already imagine that if you are making changes in your line of code, you can look at it and capture the comments right there, I can, for example, go look at the source code. And here I can see all the detailed comments that are in there. I might not have all the lines of code here because that's, in the report, but I can always jump and look at the lines of code by looking at the source view. The other part that is the database elements is something that a lot of people use, is knowing how many tables you have in your application and how the fields are used. This is very common. For example, if I want to click on customer, I get the definition of the customer. I can jump to customer number field, and it will tell me exactly how many times this customer number field is used. I have 32 references of customer number. And it tells me where they are being used. And if I want to see a particular use, I can just go and click on, say, line number 32 here, and there line number 32, and it tells me where it's being used. Now, this is the part in DocuMentor which helps with productivity. We have another tab there called GUI elements, where you can look at all the GUI elements, all your screens, wherever they are, and you can jump to that. Now, for example, this particular view, where is that? You see a big cross. This is basically an ActiveX control. So whenever we find an ActiveX control, we just put a cross there to show that's an ActiveX control. We can, if you have a character mode application or you'll be using global variables, that will all be listed here, global functions. All your macros, if you're using in DataFlex, if it's available in Visual DataFlex, it's not. Quickly I'll show you the character mode application. We can also do this for a character mode application where all the images are captured as you again rendered in the way that you will see in your application. In this case, the modules are all listed together. All the SRC, if you have 500 SRC files, they will all be there. I think the largest application that we profiled was, I think had like 2.4 million lines of character mode code, and they were 2.4 million lines of code, and I think there were like 3,000 different SRC files or something, like 600 or 3,600 SRC files. But anyway, in this particular case, you can look at a view, you can look at the details. It actually shows you the screen here, what the image looks like, and the same details that are in the Visual DataFlex example is also available. I can jump to a line number, look at the code. I can see it's an entry line. I can see the image as it appears in the code. All of that is available if you're using cloud, etc. But the point is that you're getting a clear idea about what we are trying to accomplish here. Let me switch back. Okay. So we see, even though our approach to DocuMentor is to take your source level code and create a technical documentation, that's the obvious use of DocuMentor. But from our point of view, we are addressing a wider challenge in the market. Like I said earlier, that the challenge is not only, it's primarily that the DataFlex user base is shrinking, the developer base, and new ones are not coming in, and there are legacy applications out there that need to be maintained. So the idea is that you create documentation and use the technical documentation to train new people quickly and make programmers who are currently working with developers with DataFlex more productive. As you can see that I went through an entire application, and I didn't have to be I don't have to be an expert in DataFlex to understand the architecture of the application. I can just click around and follow, starting either from the dialog, or I can start from a database, or I can start from a particular module and follow the use of that module in the application quickly. And that helps you with the productivity. If you're taking on maintenance of a new application that somebody else wrote a long time ago, but you're taking on the new maintenance, and that happens very frequently in the DataFlex market, well, it will make you more productive. It will save your customers money. And the other part that we also we also feel that DocuMentor addresses is the risk management. If you have key individuals who are writing all the code and if they leave the company, well, what did they write? What is that? So what was the work they were doing? And I think that by implementing the software development process and putting your code in a certain way, writing comments, and using DocuMentor, you're going to minimize the impact of the key, losing the key personnel. I'm not going to go too much into the details of, well, we can talk about it a little bit. Let's start with a demo. And you guys can also, if you want to try out, there's the free version of, limited version of DocuMentor is available on our website. So all you have to do is go to you can go to mertechdata.com. You can click on downloads. And if you have already registered to download our product from before, you can just go here, enter your email, and click on this link, the icon that you see, DocuMentor. And what we are doing is that we are using a Java Web Start technology. The entire documentation, the DocuMentor tool is based on Java Web Start module, and then if you need to implement to install other components, it automatically tells you or downloads it for you. And the other part is that whenever you run your application DocuMentor again, it checks on the back end for new updates and automatically downloads the update for you. So when you click this, it will install something on your desktop, an icon, and basically you should be able to then run that. And I'm going to show you what it looks like when it runs. Okay. So you should be able to see my desktop now, and on my desktop, after I click on that icon, I'll have a little DocuMentor shortcut that's installed. This thing is a little bit slow because I'm running inside a virtual machine right now. So, all right, here you go. All right. So the entire DocuMentor package is really very simple. It's 5 steps, 5 dialogues. It's a visit driven. When you run the first one, it gives you the bill number, etc. You can click on that, and if you're downloading the free version, you can just select the free license, which is limited functionality. Then you go to the next page. You will pick your DataFlex version, whichever it is on your system that's installed. You can pick your order example. So whatever examples you want to profile or workspace that you have in you specify. It will automatically pick up the SRC files for you. You don't have to point to that. And I can specify an output directly. Say, for example, I can say, okay, I can say desktop, new folder. All right, next. And it gives me all the different items, and I can say click finish, and it will continue. So I can just start that. It will go in the background, analyze the process, and continue. And this is all you need to do for running your application. like I said, that depending on your processing power and all of that, it will take some time because you're processing a lot of information. But considering that you're running this in the background, not on your local machine all the time, and it's run, you can start it in the afternoon, go away, or late in the afternoon on a Friday night, and let it run for a couple of hours and come back with a report for you. Okay, let's go back to it. While it's running in the background, I'm going to just go forward. Okay. I think, I'll just quickly go over some of the benefits and things. I think that I've made enough points to talk about that, the benefits training new developers and et cetera, management risk. Let's talk about the technology that we use. The entire system is built on Java. And we are using the Java technology. Okay. Because it's based on Java, it can be run on any platform. So, for example, I use a Mac OS X for my machine, for main machine, and this is running parallels inside Mac. But I can run DocuMentor on my Mac or Linux or whatever machine I have. It supports VDF7 onwards, and it supports character mode DataFlex as well. The installation and delivery is simply, like I showed you, where you click on an icon on the top. It'll do everything for you. You can look at the sample reports on our website if you go to our browser page for the product. Okay. DocuMentor. So there are all these links here that you can look at. One is the SIG CodeJoc project that's going on, the special interest group, CodeJoc controls. So we took that open source project and generated documentation for that. You can look at the detailed documentation. That particular, I don't know how old this one is, but the number of lines of code is about it's 237,000 lines of code here. They have 1,300 classes, so we have a summary of that. Some of the things that we also profile are the warnings. We will tell you if there is something missing or is wrong in your code. We also identify obsolete code, which is very useful for people who are migrating from older versions of DataFlex to newer versions. We can identify what your obsolete codes are, etc. So anyway, there is also a getting started guide available on our website that you can go to, and there's a DocuMentor white paper. You can go to getting started. Basically, it shows you what we have been doing right now. We also have just before I forget, we have a webinar. We have a promotion going on, an iPad giveaway. If you try out the DocuMentor, the free version even, and enter your, I think probably December or something, and you would be able to win an iPad. So an incentive for you to try out. I have a couple of questions here, so I'm going to take some questions. One is from Niels. For web applications, we do profile web applications. If you run it, and it will automatically pick up webapp.src, but we are not doing anything with JavaScript or the ASP code because that will require us to start parsing for another language altogether. Any other questions? Hi, Niels. You should be able to hear me. Did they answer your question, Neil? Should be able to speak. Okay. Any other questions? Garrett, you should have something.
Nope.
Nope.
I'm going to give it a try, though.
Go ahead. Now everybody should be able to listen to you also, so I'll unmute you. Go ahead.
No, I actually don't have questions, but
okay, you're going to try.
Definitely give it a try. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah. Okay. Is there any comments you all have? Now, one of the things that we understand very clearly that when you're trying to promote a product like DocuMentor, it's a new product. People have lived without documentation for a long time, 20, 30 years. So the question is that why should we use it now? And the thing is that what we feel is that there's always a good time to start the process, and especially if you're growing your team. It is more of a concept selling from our side because we want to make sure that if you are following the process, if you understand the big picture and you see the benefits of implementing something like that, then it's for your own good. Now, one of the things, especially for those who write, especially for those who write custom code for their customers, one of the features we have in DocuMentor is that you can give them limited documentation to your customer. So one of the things that a lot of people have said in the past that, well, they get this complaint that what is DataFlex who, or data who, and the fear that they really have is that their data and their application is going to be tied and captured, and how they're going to maintain that, and who's going to support this application once you write the program and go away. So people want to stay with some mainstream technology. But what happens if, say, for example, you're writing a web application or a visual DataFlex application, you have your data on SQL Server for the customer, and you're providing them some kind of a documentation of what the application looks like. I think a lot of their fears would go away about what language you're using. It doesn't matter what language you're using. You have the architecture of this information available, and anybody can come in and take a look at it. It's not a black box for the customer. So this is something that developers can find interesting, especially those who do custom coding for other companies. Here in the background, you probably see that the report that the Wine example that we ran popped up. It's limited because the free version has profiles only 20 modules, but you get the idea of what it looks like. You can click on My Maintenance. You can look at the GUI elements and some of that, and you can do that same thing for your code. If you want to try out with character mode, let us know, and we can always provide you with that. One of the things, let me just show you another thing. If we get a purchase license, so this is the one with the character mode. License has expired. All right, that's not a good thing. But the character mode also, you can go through and run the process, and it will pick up your root directory and work with you through that. All right. So one of the things that people ask about is what are the character mode applications are supported or not? Because character mode applications are different. You have multiple source files, but we do work with that. Typically, what we try to do is that for character mode applications, we try to provide it as a service. If you're interested in the service, we can give you as a product ability to run it yourself. We have addressed a lot of the issues like people writing custom macros and changing the structure of the language. So one of the things that DocuMentor does, and that's why it takes a little bit longer to run, is that we parse out your entire FMAC and then understand what any custom FMAC you have written. We take that, we understand the definition, and then when it occurs in your code, we know how to parse that. So if you're interested with character mode application, let us know and we can work with you in trying to create that. Already talked to you about the DocuMentor iPad promotion. So with that, I'm going to end. If you don't have any questions. All right. Well, thank you for joining me today. If you have any questions, sure, always send me an email or let me know your thoughts. If you have any feedback or if you feel that there's some feature that we can implement in the product, we'll certainly be looking into that. The DocuMentor 2.0 is out, which has the ability to do the source code capture as well as ability to view on mobile device. iPad is what we are supporting right now. And, we are going to continue to work on this and improve it. But primarily, we're going to require feedback from the customers, what kind of features they'd like to see. So if you have any thoughts, please send me an email. Thank you. Bye.